We've seen plenty of protests across the country this year, with many of them having to do with Black Lives Matter and perceived inequality in treatment by police. You know, it all comes down to race and the way certain people react to others of a different race. Let's face it, race and discrimination have been an undercurrent in this country since its founding and continues to be a tricky topic to navigate today. That hasn't stopped a group of professors at the University of Houston downtown from editing a book entitled Critical Race Studies Across Disciplines. Dr. Jonathan Chism is an assistant professor of history, was one of those working on this text. Thank you for being here this morning, Doctor. Talk about this text. Who is this book aimed at?
This book is aimed largely at the academic community, students and scholars, to educate them about the history of critical race studies and how it has expanded across disciplines, that is critical race theory.
And critical race theory, for those who aren't familiar with it, what does that mean? What is that study of, and why is it something that now is being, especially on the college level, I understand, more so than elementary and high school, correct?
Correct. Critical race theory, to put it simply, is a movement that developed in the legal academy during the 1970s that aims to examine and resist racism in American laws and in society at large.
Well, school districts in this state have recently voted not to even allow the discussion of critical race theory. What do you understand is their fear, considering that this doesn't normally apply to high schools and elementary schools? What have you heard about the fears of people who don't want this discussed?
Well, the fear is that it will perpetuate racism, as they have called it, and that it will make it as though all whites are racist. And it is misconceiving white privilege and institutional racism. It is completely misunderstanding the point that critical race theorists have made about racism in society at large.
What kind of points are they?
Well, first, many persons who embrace American individualism and the Horatio Alger myth have had a hard time understanding what white privilege is. They assume that success is equally available to all persons who work hard, who are virtuous. This logic reinforces white superiority as whites attribute their success to their work ethic, to their industriousness and virtuousness. Racial disparities, they conclude, have nothing to do with power and privilege. Poverty is more pervasive among people of color because those people don't work as hard, are less intelligent and less virtuous. And this is a myth. Second, many persons narrowly misperceive racism as something that is perpetuated by racist individuals, by racist segregationist Southerners, by people who have ties to bold-faced racist organizations like the KKK or the neo-Nazis. Such overt racism, it is concluded, dissipated, waned after the civil rights movement, and racism is hardly an issue in our contemporary society. And this ignores the institutional racism that is deeply embedded in our American society today.
So while you're teaching it and on the college level and trying to get people to understand about the misconceptions, I'm sure that there's no illusion on your end about that it's going to be difficult for people who have already made up their minds to really embrace this and understand it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And part of the goal is to present the facts about these racial disparities and hopefully to help them see and listen to the stories of those that are most affected by it.
Do you think this can be helpful in bringing people together, and what's it going to take to do that? Because you're right. I mean, if everybody has knowledge about what racism actually is, and they agree that it happened and that whites today aren't responsible about what whites did 100 years ago. Clearly, there's no relationship between those two, but there's still that undercurrent of racism that still continues. What is it going to take to get people to come together and understand the realities of what goes on?
Well, what it is going to take is, it reminds me of a quote from James Baldwin, that nothing can be changed until it is faced. that if we are going to advance towards racial progress, we have to face the truth about the wickedness, the horror of our American past. And that is at times uncomfortable, it is challenging, but we have to face it. Mm-hmm. And the way that we face it, again, is through engaging others, through listening to what those from oppressed and marginalized communities have to say, through respecting their experiences and voices, and not discounting and dismissing it.
And I noticed that what you teach as well is you don't blame people for things that happened in the past, correct?
That is correct. I do discuss white privilege and how those that exist in today benefit from the past, from the way our society is structured and organized as it relates to race. Mm-hmm. But it's not a matter of blaming people for the racism that exists in our society.
You know what, I want to do a Newsmakers Extra. We're going to continue this conversation in a few minutes, okay, online, because I want to ask you another couple of questions. Dr. Jonathan Chism, thank you so much for what you and your fellow professors are doing, tackling a topic that is uncomfortable, but certainly is something that needs to be talked about. It is uncomfortable, perhaps because it needs to be uncomfortable.